Introducing you to people across North Carolina and around the world who put their Catholic faith into action. This is FaithWorks on Catholic 540 AM Divine Mercy Radio. Now, here's your host for FaithWorks, Ellen White.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of FaithWorks on Divine Mercy Radio. Our show highlights individuals through God's grace who put their faith into action daily. Amazing people who have an interesting, sometimes overlooked impact on our Catholic faith. On FaithWorks, we share their stories. I'm your host, Ellen White. Today, we welcome local neonatologist Dr. Marty McCaffrey back into the studio. Dr. McCaffrey has decades of experience caring for the most vulnerable newborns. He's a professor of pediatrics, a nationally recognized expert in neonatal care, and a passionate advocate for life-affirming medical ethics, especially in the area of prenatal diagnosis. His work bridges cutting-edge medicine with a deeply grounded Catholic understanding of human dignity. Welcome back, Dr. McCaffrey.
Thanks, Ellen.
It's so awesome. I love our conversations, really.
It's wonderful to be here. I mean, I love sitting in studio with you and talking with you. I just, your prayer at the opening was wonderful, but I would also pray the Holy Spirit just be here and bless us with the faith, hope, grace, and love that we need in this studio to transmit some really critical messages to people about their families, their babies, and their appreciation for life.
It's so evident that you really care, and we are definitely grateful for that. All right, so the last time you joined us, we had the privilege of hearing from some incredible warrior moms, Hannah, Nicole, and Patsy, women you like to call street fighters, and I add for life. So street fighters for life.
Absolutely.
Together, we shared the powerful stories of families who, when faced with life-limiting diagnoses for their unborn children, chose not despair, but radical hope. Their journeys were not defined by fear or avoidance, but by a courageous love. And I love this, a love that embraces life no matter how short or fragile it may be. You also shared your own powerful journey and your passion for speaking truth into the often misunderstood world of prenatal diagnosis. Since then, you've delivered a compelling presentation that dives even deeper into the ethical, medical, and spiritual challenges in this space. Okay, start by sharing the heart behind that talk and what inspired you to speak out now. Or have you ever stopped? I mean,
I think I've been speaking out for a while. There's a few things I think that really started me speaking out, although I think my views of this world have evolved over time based on sort of circumstances that have been encountered not only on the medical side, but on the ethical side, and certainly on the legislative, the church side, and the medical organization side. I think, my journey really started probably with the birth of my daughter, who's got Down syndrome. Mm-hmm. And Shay really pretty dramatically changed our lives. And we knew there was something that was amiss with the world. I think of the first evidence maybe directly that we had of that was shortly after Shay was born, and we had been discharged home after a couple of weeks in the NICU. And we were back for a follow-up appointment and met an acquaintance out in the courtyard of the hospital. And the acquaintance came up to us. We let that person know what had happened with us. It was Shay, she had Down syndrome. And she looked at us and said, "Oh, didn't you have the test?" And I didn't quite know what to say. In retrospect, I should have said something like, "Well, do you have a pillow handy and I could put it over her head and we could be done with this?" But it really made me fairly angry afterwards, even though we just tried to walk away. And I think from that experience, I really decided I ain't walking away no more. And there's just too much at stake here. fast forward to a meeting that Shay and I attended up in Washington in 2009. And this was to talk at a press conference about the impact of the Affordable Care Act on families and kids with special needs. And the impact has been pretty profound. And I would be willing to debate anyone that it's not been necessarily very beneficial. But at that meeting, I met a bunch of families with children in pictures, some of them because they're hard to travel with, some there in person, of children with conditions like trisomy 13 and 18. Mm-hmm. These were conditions that I had always been taught were lethal up until that day. I would have still been telling moms, I'm so sorry about your baby. We'll be very happy to support you in comfort care for your child, but your child isn't going to be able to survive.
We've talked about this at length previously, Dr. McCaffrey, with other interviews that we've done. And I've often wondered, just in the back of my mind with experience in medical school, when students are taught, my own desire is to go deeper and to see things for myself. So is there this tendency for medical students just to accept things on face value with what they're being taught and not, like with this experience with trisomy 13 and 18?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's even more ingrained now that people accept what governing organizations tell them is the truth. The mantra during COVID is truly what's been going on for quite some time now. The science is settled, and science is never settled. But I found out pretty clearly that day that the science for me on trisomy 13, 18 wasn't settled. These people advised me to go home and read the literature that was actually out there, which I'd never looked up or been exposed to. And I had accepted the party line that these were quote unquote lethal or incompatible with life diagnoses. And in truth, when I found the literature, they're not. So what I found is that these diagnoses very often could have survivals at a year for a child of 40 to 50% in the literature at that time. Mm. And it was old literature. It was from the 90s. And that's not at all what people were talking about. And still today, if you go out and Google some of these disorders, you will find the literature telling you they only have survival of 5 to 10% at 1 year. But these children, these babies, these people now who are living, many now into their teens and 20s, are my passion and my ministry. And there has to be a willingness for us to really look at the science, look at the data, and at a bare minimum, do what doctors are supposed to do, which is offer informed consent for parents, not biased information that is really discriminatory.
So I want you to just define the ethical landscape that you find yourself in now. And I know that there is intentional language that is used in the medical community. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So when we talk about ethics in medicine, especially around prenatal diagnosis, where do we begin? How is the landscape being shaped? How has it been shaped up to this point? I've got so many questions about this so that we can clearly identify what the issues are.
So I think you have to begin back in, I think you could probably begin back in the 1930s or 1940s, but certainly in the 50s and 60s, where the bioethical revolution, which is what I call it, occurred. And we started losing traditional ethics at that point. And the transition that occurred was movement from a sanctity of life ethic, which grounded all ethical principles, to a principle of quality of life and utilitarian principles of the greater good for the greater number. That is absolutely where we are right now. And then you move into the 70s and the early 80s, and ethicists at places like Georgetown developed something called the Georgetown Mantra, which now you have grounding of 4 pillars in a foundation that is totally shifting sand called quality of life. And those 4 pillars are beneficence, autonomy, non-malfeasance, and justice. And honestly, when you start talking about quality of life as your grounding and those 4 principles, you are able to justify just about anything. And I truly believe, that you could actually justify, for instance, some of the worst horrors in history, including Nazism and the Holocaust. So that is where we are right now. And I think these 4 principles, that are grounded in quality of life are good things, but only if they're grounded in sanctity of life.
I just had Dr. O'Connell on talking about end-of-life care and how we can adequately prepare ourselves. And I can't help but think, Dr. McCaffrey, that it's almost like as a physician, you're kind of swimming upstream. As a lay person, I'm overwhelmed with the information that you're providing in this and trying to kind of make sense of something that's way out of my wheelhouse. It seems like as a layperson, we just need to kind of understand what's going on in the bigger picture, but protect ourselves in the smaller sphere, educate ourselves. But I mean, how do you even get good literature so that we can educate ourselves? It's almost too overwhelming.
It's a lot. I mean, and you're talking about end of life care. You're talking about euthanasia, which now spans across the spectrum.
Yeah.
It's not just old people that are affected by this. It's people with mental health issues.
Right.
It's I'm going to get to this because it actually is what happens with comfort care and palliative care for babies with so-called lethal diagnoses, which language-wise, we now like to call life-limiting because we're a kinder, gentler people.
Well, I was going to say, you've spoken about how medical language often carries hidden assumptions. Besides those, give us some examples of where terms are intentionally or unintentionally anti-life.
Well, I mean, it's just so prevalent. So generally, I will say that when we talk to moms about prenatal testing, which we're going to talk a little bit more about, what it is genetic testing. It's really screening for genetic disorders, trying to change the population because honestly, none of these tests do anything to improve the health of the baby. So prenatal testing, genetic testing.
Okay, so maybe we need to shift it too and say, okay, we're looking at this from a Catholic Christian perspective. And with getting this information, what does that mean with the testing? So it basically means that we're adequately prepared to handle the diagnosis.
So what the naysayers would say, who would dispute what I just said, which is really that this does not help, and really all it ultimately ends up with is encouraging abortion.
Right.
What they would say is it helped prepare parents and mothers for the birth of a child with medical complexities. I would say that that is just simply not the case because we know what the abortion rates are for these disorders. And that is where the measure is that will tell us what this testing does. So when you're talking about Down syndrome at this point, the abortion rates in this country with early now prenatal diagnosis, a screening test, which we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Screening versus a diagnostic test. With screening tests and with earlier and earlier medical abortion, the abortion rates for Down syndrome in the best studies that are out there are 92%. So it's pretty clear that most women are not using this testing to prepare them for a future baby. And it's very similar for the other things that are tested for. Down syndrome is trisomy 21. Trisomy 18 is the next most common genetic trisomy disorder, and then trisomy 13. And the abortion rates for all of those with prenatal diagnosis are fairly close and similar. Trisomy 18 and trisomy 13 are just less common. Can I go back? You asked a question earlier, Ellen, about language and the different terms that people use, right? So I think that is really important because the language game is so critical in directing people in this process. The the abortion industry would like us never to use the term abortion. We call it termination. That's what it's called in much of medical literature, termination. Lethal and incompatible with life. Somewhere along the way, somebody realized those are not nice, warm, fuzzy terms. So we're going to go with life-limiting anomaly. That might be better. And we'll talk to people about it that way. Pregnant people? I mean, the assumption being that people, like men, can get pregnant? I mean, the terminology is just crazy. I would add palliative care when referring to infants after birth, that they will get palliative care. Very different from what adults or older children might get with palliative care. In most cases, not all, so I want to qualify that. When institutions, hospitals, facilities are talking about palliative care for infants, they're talking about hospice care or comfort care. It's very clear. And the literature that is out there on that is that when there's a prenatal diagnosis, which is when we bring in this notion of palliative care, comfort care, hospice care, what that consists of is mainly warmth, narcotics, and psychosocial support for the family. Everything is geared, and this is not Dr. Marty McCaffrey talking, this is literature published in peer-reviewed journals. What this care is geared towards is the most efficient ending of a life. If you're diagnosed after a baby is born, palliative care can be very different. When you're diagnosed in the NICU after you're 6, 7, 10 days old, you've already had oxygen or a breathing tube or IVs or tube feedings. And at that point, parents see that their baby is alive, and they often make very, very different choices. And indeed, that's what the literature shows for postnatal diagnoses. The factor most highly associated with a baby with trisomy 13 or 18 never leaving the hospital after birth and dying in the hospital is a prenatal diagnosis.
How do you get from not getting the prenatal diagnosis to having the baby be delivered and cared for then?
Yeah, so what will sometimes happen now is people will refuse prenatal diagnosis. But what you need to know is since 2015, prenatal diagnosis, and by prenatal diagnosis, we've had different tests that we've done over the decades to try and prenatally diagnose genetic disorders. We as physicians, as medical folks, have always been on the hunt, for genetic diagnoses. Specifically, Down syndrome was the big one. So we had other less effective, less sensitive, less specific tests in the past that looked at a variety of factors. What we look at now is something called non-invasive prenatal testing. This is a blood test done on a mom, and moms will have circulating baby blood and DNA in their blood. And if you get an adequate specimen, you can assess the chromosomal structure of the baby and make a prenatal screening diagnosis. These tests are not perfect. They are, even by the American College of OBGYN, only to be used as screens. Okay. They are not supposed to be, wow, my baby has this now. The next step is supposed to be either amniocentesis or a chorionic villus sampling if you want a definitive diagnosis. So some mothers will say, I don't want to do those tests. But the problem is these tests have become so routinized now that women just sign the form and they do them. Oftentimes there's not an adequate explanation. And I would say in a little defense of the obstetricians and maternal care providers, there's only so much time to try and sit down and talk to a mother about genetic screening and what we're looking for. It does take time. And if you're trying to push through moms in a pretty short appointment, a prenatal appointment that may only be 20 minutes, half hour, if you're trying to get an ultrasound in there somewhere, there just may not be the time, even with good intent, to do it properly. The other thing the literature will show is that certainly obstetric residents right now don't feel that they have adequate training to really talk about all the intricacies of genetic prenatal diagnosis. And I'm talking about the basic genetic prenatal diagnosis. There are some very fancy screens that are coming out that will look at try and examine a whole genome and look for everything, or look for specific smaller types of disorders using different types of probes. But this is the standard test that most moms will be offered.
Okay.
There's 4 or 5, 6 different companies right now that offer them.
Okay.
And the tests are screened. So that is an important message for your listeners. And the screens are less likely to be true, meaning you're less likely to have a true positive the younger you are. So what is young? Your listeners could actually go out and look up NIPT calculators and find how accurate a screen for them actually would be. What you will find when you look at these tests, and what you will find when the lab companies talk about them, is numbers that look very impressive. They will say sensitivity, specificity, 98, 99%. And many people, including some healthcare providers, maybe some docs and even other folks, midwives and others, practitioners, might walk away saying, these are incredible screening tests. I know we're not supposed to use them as diagnostic, but 98, 99 is really good. 100 is you picked up everything. The fact is that sensitivity and specificity are very different. When you are a mom getting a test back, what you want to know about is what's called the positive predictive value.
I remember you talking.
PPV of your test.
Okay.
And you can see the PPV on these calculators when you go in them. You can also see sensitivity and specificity, but you want to know the PPV. If I have a positive screen, somebody calls me, or God forbid, which happens, sends me a note on my computer for my chart that says I have a positive screen, and nobody calls me, but it says I have trisomy 18 in my baby. What you can do is figure out what is the chance that that's a real true positive, because it's only a screening test.
Okay.
Now, let me add one thing to that. So the problem with that, though, is that many people get these screening tests and may take them as truth, may take them as a firm diagnosis. And no one has published well the literature on what percent or how many moms get a positive screening test and then walk out of their clinic and go to an abortion clinic because they think now that they have one of these disorders, which, by the way, their docs have told them are lethal or life-limiting and very problematic. And they head down to abort their baby. Some estimate it may be as high as at least 10 or 20% who get a positive screen. It's really unclear right now. It's literature we don't have.
Mm-hmm. It's been a while since I've been in a doctor's office getting ready to have a baby. So my experience with these screenings and when they're provided, and I just still can't wrap my mind around, Dr. McCaffrey, about the stages and when it's important to get the information out there so that parents that are expecting can educate themselves, know what the language is and how the language can, they can be misinformed through the language that they're getting, or even through the screening tests. There's just so much. Why do you believe that it's so important for Catholic families to recognize the power of language in shaping what we accept as morally normal? What do you think? And how can we just kind of understand this landscape better so that we are adequately prepared as parents?
Yeah, I think trying to prepare a parent, for us as Catholics, for sure, you're moving into a situation where maybe you're engaged, you're getting married. We have programs for folks who are undergoing and planning on such ceremonies and receiving this marriage sacrament and starting their lives together. I think we talk about natural family planning in many of those. I don't think that's necessarily standard in every sort of pre-Cana operation. But this is something that could easily be part of that.
Yes, yeah.
I think that should be a part of that area of education. I think, depending on your programs in schools,
Yes.
I really think any school, I mean, in their quote unquote sex ed program, which they have those out there, this could be part of that. And it's an important piece of people understanding what is actually going on with my baby. I think the language really is critical, because when you get one of these tests back and you're hearing things like life-limiting, or many people are still saying lethal. I mean, parents believe that that's what it is. I spend a lot of time on Facebook in trisomy support groups. I was on there today and picked up 3 or 4 parents, totally distressed with a positive NIPT, non-invasive prenatal test, screen, talking about setting up their amniocentesis, their CVS, trying to decide whether they would keep their baby or not because their doctor told them that this condition is lethal. Your baby probably will never be born. If they are born, they'll only live an hour. If they live an hour, they'll only live a week. I mean, these are the things that people are told. Mm-hmm. And what they also are rarely told is screening is flawed, but then moving you on to the diagnostic testing also has risk. So amnio and chorionic villus sampling poses a risk to the baby that many, many times parents aren't fully apprised of. Mm-hmm. So the risk for losing your baby with an amnio may be as high as 1 in 500 to 1 in 1,000. Mm-hmm. And so, those are not great odds, actually, when you think about what you're rolling the dice for. And if it's all about just finding a diagnosis that you want to be comfortable knowing it's going to happen, why put your baby at risk?
Yes, right. Wow. All right, if you're just tuning in, this is Ellen White with FaithWorks on Divine Mercy Radio, and today I'm speaking with Dr. Marty McCaffrey about the Christian response to prenatal diagnosis, medical ethics, and disability. And we are grateful for our show's sponsor, Thales College. I like to hear, Dr. McCaffrey, that you were engaging on these. Is it a forum on Facebook?
There are at least for trisomy groups, especially, and specifically trisomy 13 and 18, or other rare trisomies. There's at least 6 or 8 different Facebook support groups that are out there.
Wow.
And this is where people are getting their information. This is where they are seeing, if they wander out onto the internet, hopefully they find their way there.
Right.
And they're seeing parents tell stories about their children who've survived, who've had what would be basic medical interventions for a baby with 46 chromosomes, but are characterized as aggressive therapy or wanting everything done when it's a trisomy 13 or 18 patient. So, but they get to see what is out there, and it's interesting to see the reactions from the medical community. Medical community very often will express great displeasure with Facebook support groups and the internet, because they would say that these groups will irrationally raise the expectations of parents. And it's just,
I mean, it depends on
true.
it depends on the expectation that you're talking about.
Right. If you've got a preconceived expectation, it may defy that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's I think a discussion for another day.
Yes.
But, I mean, the expectation from a Catholic Christian perspective. I mean, it's God's grace working through it, and we have no idea what this experience is going to be like.
Yep.
Not only for the child, for the family, for the parents, for the siblings, for the community. I mean, it just goes beyond what we could ever imagine with caring for these children.
I think for us as Catholics and Christians, these types of people they're critical for us. I mean, we need these people to preserve our humanity. They will call us to think larger than ourselves. They will call us to dig deeper. They will call us to sacrifice. But the challenge is that we live in a world now that's a pro-choice world, and not just related to abortion per se, but I want choice. I want autonomy. I want me. We are moving closer and closer to a world where we are our own God. And God has been kicked out of that world. I mean, we want autonomy, that principle of, the quality of life ethic that we now are living under, the tyranny of the ethicists.
Well, you said that we worship autonomy and fear disability. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, if, autonomy, I kind of put, and I was listening to Bishop Barron a few weeks ago. A good friend sent me a podcast with him, and he put together autonomy with compassion. I think compassion could be like the fifth element, the fifth prong of this quality of life ethic. It's not quite in there, but it sort of probably fits under some of the others in terms of beneficence, justice, non-malfeasance. But I think what we look at is we want to be able to do what we need to do to make ourselves happy. And dealing with disability, welcoming disability, requires that you are going to have to sacrifice. And it may be financial, it may be social, it may be a number of things that you are forced to sacrifice, change your life. And at that point, you have to give your life up to God in prayer and pray for the ability to do what is needed to do to support this disabled person. I think all of us every day, even if we don't have someone in our lives, if we look around in our interactions daily, we come across people who are in some way disabled. And I think it should call us on a secular level, not necessarily a Catholic level, to realize that we all are going to be dependent at some point on other people. And this acknowledged dependence, I think secularly, should drive people to be open to people with disability. But further, for us as Catholics and Christians, we have to recognize that everyone is made in the image of God. This is what we believe. And we are body and we are soul, but we are not defined by our ability to reason. And Lord knows what my daughter with Down syndrome has got spinning in her head when things are going on. She may be reasoning on a much higher level than I can even ever comprehend. I'm not able to judge that. But we have to look at these folks because they will inspire us to do things that will help us preserve our humanity. We have to recognize the dignity of the individual.
Well, on that note, how should we be forming our consciences, Dr. McCaffrey, and our children's to value life even in the face of difficulty or imperfection?
Yeah,
what would you say?
I think first of all, it starts in our homes. Everything starts in the home.
Yep.
I mean, and I think it starts with prayer. I think it starts with daily prayer, family prayer, with adoration. I think it starts by us showing our children what it means to be a good Catholic, or on a more base level, just a good human in regards to other people. I think we have to take the time out to do that and make that clear and teach those lessons. I think we have to try and hammer home in our kids and with each other that we are not defined, again, by our ability to reason, by our achievements. It just gives me no end of angst when I hear people talk about, for instance, like my daughter or any disabled child. Look at them, Down syndrome. They're in the movies, they're on television, they're in Special Olympics, they're traveling around the world. This one went to college. Those things will never happen for my daughter, but she has no less dignity than any of those other people. Down syndrome people, trisomy 13, trisomy 18, whatever disability group you want to think of, should not be defined by their achievement. They should be defined by the inherent dignity that they own as a child of God.
Yes.
And we have to help our kids to understand that, but first we have to learn that lesson.
I'm curious, Dr. McCaffrey, what role does the church play in helping families navigate these medical crossroads with both conviction and compassion? What do you think?
I think the church has to play a huge role. I think faith has to play a huge role.
Have you encountered that? Do you feel like...
No, I haven't encountered it.
Okay.
I think the church has absolutely failed with regard to people with disability.
Okay.
And why do I say that? I say that because the catechism sounds wonderful. We talk about the dignity of the individual. But in practice, what have we done? when we're talking specifically about prenatal testing and prenatal diagnosis, if you peruse the USCCB website, if you go through multiple diocesan websites, what is generally there is talk about preserving the dignity of life, trying to avoid abortion, very admirable, not only because it saves a child's life, but also because it spares the mother all the pain, the trauma of the abortion process. But what you find generally is prenatal and perinatal hospice referrals. What the church has done is accepted the language of the utilitarians and accepted the language of physicians and standard medical organizations in talking about lethal, incompatible with life conditions, and the fact that we would want them to be comfortable, we want them to be born, and we would like them to have, even though they have a short life, a meaningful life with their parents for the short time they're here. The fact is that many of these children are able to live for much longer periods. So what has been proposed as the alternative to abortion for prenatal diagnosis is very often by the church has been palliative care, comfort care, hospice care.
Interesting.
And accepting that is unacceptable to me. I mean, I look at that as knowing what we know now, it's unethical, it's immoral. I think what we know now, where we should be, is that the church should be supporting each one of these children, hopefully could get to a live birth. They do have a heavy stillbirth rate, but if they could get to a live birth, that we would support them, stabilize and evaluate them, and see what's going on with them. I mean, some are going to have some significant medical complexities that may not allow for a very long life. And for those children, for those infants, then certainly perinatal hospice may be appropriate. But for many of these children, they will have the ability to live for much longer periods if we are willing to do the things for them that we would do for the same medical conditions in a child with 46 chromosomes.
Right. Now, on a practical level, if there is a situation like this where there is a prenatal diagnosis with a trisomy 13 baby, say, and a family has reached out to a local pastor and said, we're obviously going to carry this baby to term and we're going to care for it and accept, whatever comes. What do you see as the pastor's obligation to this family? What could they do to help this family? What do you see?
Yeah,
Dr.
I
McCaffrey?
think pastors who are listening to this or who are willing to get educated on this subject of prenatal diagnosis need to understand that there is hope for life for these children. Not all of them for very long,
right, but
for many of them. What places are looking at now for these children with some of the severe genetic diagnoses, trisomy 13, trisomy 18, are survivals of 50 to 60% at 1 year now. And those numbers probably could be even higher. What you cannot change for these particular kids and some of the other lesser common trisomies is that they will have severe mental and motor impairments. And so the conversation now has become less about lethal and incompatible with life. And the conversation now has shifted to quality of life. And so I think what pastors, clergy have to realize is that there are other options for these children and these pregnancies. And they should be advising their parishioners to consider those options. And I think they have help out there. I think there are a number of organizations that could be most helpful. And one that we've talked about on this show before, Ellen, is Be Not Afraid. I would advise folks who want more information about this to go to www.benotafraid.net. And at the Be Not Afraid website, there are a number of resources. One is an article that I wrote and had published in Ethics and Medics, which is the National Catholic Bioethics Center journal, and it's the proper Catholic and pro-life response to prenatal diagnosis. It is up there under the research elements that are available on the website. But also, there's much more information about trisomy 13, 18. There's information there for clerics for sure. But there is also an opportunity there for families, parents, moms, who are dealing with a prenatal diagnosis to drop a contact note, and Be Not Afraid will set you up with a service organization that will walk with you through this process, that will stay with you, what we call them a parent care coordinator, who will take you through the pregnancy, through the birth, and hopefully to the time thereafter as you're trying to get the care that you need as a mom, and then later for yourself and your child. And we recognize that all lives are not going to be long. So certainly we deal with some death as well for families that are dealing with these prenatal diagnoses. But we offer the opportunity and the hope for life. And we encourage people to think about, when your baby is born, working with physicians in your facilities, your hospitals, to stabilize and evaluate your baby.
In that interview that we did last year, I think it was last May, Dr. McCaffrey, I cannot believe it was that long ago, but the beautiful women that were on and shared pictures of their beautiful children too, Hannah, Nicole, and Patsy, they share their intimate stories with their own experiences. And I highly recommend that you check that out. You can certainly search my podcasts, FaithWorks, back in May or June of 2024. And it's with Dr. McCaffrey again. And benotafraid.net is that website with, my gosh, an abundance of information, resources for clergy, for parents, grandparents that might be experiencing a prenatal diagnosis. All right. So how can we start, Dr. McCaffrey, forming a culture in our homes and parishes that embrace life, defends the vulnerable, and prepares the next generation to do the same? I mean, we kind of talked about this where you said it kind of starts at the home. And teaching. What else would you add to that?
Yeah, I think that, a lot of the key is education, Ellen. I think so. In the home, for sure. I think in other places where we educate, especially people who are being educated and are being instructed in the faith, especially the Catholic and other Christian faiths. But in Sunday school operations, I think these kind of conversations are things that should be started and discussed. I could imagine there would be disability curriculums, that could be developed to introduce younger people to all of these different elements that will allow them to really appreciate the dignity of every human. I think we just have to work a whole lot harder on this than we have. I think as far as the church, when you have children with disabilities, right now the church is not a super friendly place to go for education. I mean, religious programs at many Catholic schools are not able to accommodate kids with special needs. There's definitely need for staffing and other issues that would be constraints economically on people running those schools. But I think there needs to be a willingness to really incorporate these individuals into all elements of our Catholic and our Christian lives. Even if it's hard, people really need to be sitting down and thinking about how might we do this? When you have to go off to the public school to really get your kids, some element of education, and it's really devoid of any religious type of training or faith support. It makes things a little bit more challenging. But I think we could do a whole lot better in terms of embedding all of this type of process and curriculum into our daily lives for our kids. There's lots of ways to do it.
Yeah. All right. So before we go, what's one message you'd want every Catholic parent or grandparent to remember when it comes to prenatal diagnosis, language, and the call to protect life? Dr. McCaffrey.
I would just say the bottom line, with all of this conversation, is we are created in His image. And we have to remember that every day. The prime directive in our time, in every time, as Christ has taught us, is really to get ourselves and everyone around us to heaven. That is really where it should be focused. And there's only one path for this. The people we are talking about this afternoon, Ellen, and those with challenging prenatal diagnoses who are going to be born, they are here to light the way for us to heaven. And the path that they are illuminating is a path that is just drenched in love. And we need to realize how important these people are to us recovering our humanity.
All right, so let's talk about a book, an article. I mean, you referenced the article that you have on the Be Not Afraid website under their resources section, or a resource you'd recommend for families who want to go deeper. I guess it would just be that website.
I would say, I was on the Be Not Afraid site today. I work with Be Not Afraid, and I'm going to join the board of Be Not Afraid here shortly. So I would recommend people go there. I was reviewing the site today. It is a fantastic site. And we have some folks here in this diocese who are working hard in that organization. What I hope will be happening in this diocese over the next months, hopefully, is maybe developing our own Be Not Afraid trained organization that will support women in this area in North Carolina and maybe some neighboring states. We have right now about 14 regional BNA trained orgs around the country, but we desperately could use one here in North Carolina. Locally,
yeah. And we'll be assured of our prayers in that regard. And if you happen to be tuning in and you find that little tug on your heart to participate in Be Not Afraid and what's going on here locally, certainly you can reach out to me at FaithWorks at divinemercyradio.org, or you can reach out. What about you, Dr. McCaffrey? Can people reach out to you? How can they connect with you? Okay, so what's the best way to reach you if they have some questions about this interview?
For me, probably best way is email for me. Okay. So email is SERDOC, SEREDOC, the number 1, at gmail.com.
SEREDOC1 at gmail.com.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. Any final thoughts as we wrap up this interview?
No, just thank you for the time. And, please, people out there, listeners, if you have any questions, if you are undergoing some trials and tribulations with a family member who's got a prenatal diagnosis, let me know, or go to Be Not Afraid and let them know.
Oh, gosh, Dr. McCaffrey, thank you so much for your time.
It's a treat.
Your witness and your unwavering commitment to speaking truth with both courage and compassion.
Thanks, Ellen.
Appreciate that. You've helped us see that prenatal diagnosis is not just a medical issue. It's a deeply human, moral, and spiritual one. And you've reminded us that our response as Catholics must always be rooted in love, clarity, and the dignity of every human life. We are made in His image. All right. To our listeners, if you or someone you love is walking through a difficult diagnosis, please know you're not alone. The church is here, your parish family is here, and voices like Dr. McCaffrey's are proof that God is raising up faithful witnesses in every field to walk beside you. That's all for today's edition of FaithWorks on Divine Mercy Radio. I'm Ellen White. Thank you so much for joining us. If you missed any part of this episode or want to catch up on past conversations filled with inspiration and hope, you can find them all at divinemercyradio.org. Just click on local shows, and don't forget, you can take FaithWorks with you wherever you go. Just download the free Divine Mercy Radio app from your app store. Simply search Divine Mercy Radio NC, and you're all set to listen anytime, anywhere. Until next time, keep living your faith boldly, because faith works. God bless.